All right. So this mic works. Awesome. So hi everybody at home. Hi everybody here. Well, this is my second time speaking here this year, and last year I was here as well. And I am always wondering because I'm a 2D artist, and you might be thinking, what is this guy? What does he have to do with 3D? What's that guy doing here? Well, let me tell you. Actually, all of these images that you see here have some form of 3D involved. With the creation process, and I just want to talk about how I go through my day and how I use Cinema 4D in my day-to-day workflow. So let's just talk about it, right? So yeah, in my professional work and my personal work, I make use of Cinema 4D, Octane Render, and X-Particles and Photoshop to create my images. So an image like this, it's very messy. Imagine having to paint this by hand. It would be an insane amount of work. I'd rather walk in a desert without water than having to draw this by hand. But actually, a lot of this painting has 3D elements in it. So when I start the day, I usually, instead of sketching on paper, I start in 3D right away, and I just figure out some shapes. I start pushing and pulling some shapes and forms. And then I turn it into a city, for example. So that shape you saw here is just copied over and over to make the inner structure. And then we just need a bunch of cubes to create other buildings. And then when painted over in Photoshop, you get something like this. And I just wanted to talk about today is how, again, this would take so long to paint this all in Photoshop, but Cinema 4D is a great shortcut for me. It saves me a lot of time, and by doing that, I was able to make that image within a day, from start to finish. So yeah, here's another thing. This is what a 3D model looks like. So it's very basic. Some of the other speakers here have very elaborate clips and movies for commercials and for actual cinema movies. But for me, the 3D render is not the final result. For me, it's always the 2D illustration that is the thing that is getting sold, or to the client, or is being approved to then be turned into a final concept by a VFX department or animators or you name it. So this very crude 3D model actually provides me with enough information to work from and turn this into a final illustration that looks somewhat okay. All right. So yeah, I want to talk a bit about the tools that I use, about the shortcuts that I use to create these scenes and models and overview shots. In my day-to-day work, I work as a concept artist and illustrator in the film and games industry, and I'm usually responsible for creating environments or architecture, or locations and places. I am very bad at drawing humans and human figures, so don't get me started on that. Yeah, as a kid, I really loved playing with Legos, and when I started out with Cinema 4D, it instantly felt like playing with Legos again. So that's I've been doing ever since for about 8 years now, just stacking cubes on top of one another until you get something like that. So for this model, that kind of modern architecture shape was just a little plane, and I grabbed a nice old knife tool and made a few cuts in it, and then punched a few holes in that. And that's already the basis to go to a structure like that. And because I have that 3D model lying around, I can now, I told you about how the final result is always a 2D illustration, but since I have the 3D file lying around, I can just as easy turn it into a very small animation. Let me see if I have it. Yes, here. Like this. Oh, it rotates. It's so complex. And it crashed, apparently. But but these super simple tools really allow me to come up with like great solutions and show my client how a building like that is supposed to work. Because when the client said, "Yo, Leon, we need you to do a mining base, and it gets resources from the surface of the earth," so I just provided them with that little animation because I had the 3D model lying around anyway. So that's just saved me a lot of time. All right, so Egyptian village, and of course there's aliens, because why not? Aliens are cool, I think. so like that, we have the very standard classic Egyptian village, but then to draw, that intricate structure by hand would probably take a very long time. But in 3D, it actually looks like this. It's very messy. It's actually just a bunch of shapes stacked on top of one another. I didn't even care about the topology or if models would be clashing with each other, because I will be hiding the mistakes anyway in Photoshop when I paint over it and turn it into a final product, so to say. All right, same goes for this. I have this tower lying around, and in the illustration, I just have to, give that building a little bit of context. Like, what is it doing? What is the time of day? What is the location? What's the story? And then with a model like this, I can also, again, provide a small illustration to tell my client, yo, I can do more than just stack bricks on top of one another. It moves. This could be maybe an elevator to the moon that is just about to launch, and we see these little cars flying around. And this is actually so easy to do, because with the model that I had lying around, it is only a matter of maybe trying and animate it for about an hour or maybe two, and then go into After Effects and edit it just a little bit, and then you already have this result. It's just a very simple camera movement, and it's a light that goes, from down to up somewhere. That's all it is. Because I am not a technical person at all. I always improvise and press buttons until it either works or explodes. It often explodes, though. So that's basically what I've been doing all the time. And it is a huge amount of fun, because these tools allow me to be creative and experiment. Even though, Cinema 4D is a technical tool, and it's being used for very elaborate stuff like commercials, but you can actually use it as a base for your 2D illustrations. So I want to talk about cloners a little bit, because this is my absolute favorite tool, apart from another tool that I will talk about. So imagine just modeling this a little bit in about, 10 seconds or 20 seconds, and then turning it into a building like that. Again, drawing this by hand would be ridiculous. Why would you even try drawing this by hand? Doesn't make any sense. So you just grab this and smash it into a cloner, and then what the cloner does, it copies that little instance there, and then you can tell the cloner to maybe rotate with every step, so you get that thing on the right side there, or maybe it gets smaller with every step. I will jump into Cinema 4D in just a few moments to show how that cloner actually works, and don't laugh at me because it will be super basic. So yeah, elaborate structure like that, this little tower kind of thing. Again, stupid to draw by hand. So I just made this very abstract model. I actually cut it out of a previous model I made. So it's just like playing with Legos. You made this thing before, and now you're using that brick to make something new. So here it is put into a regular cloner, and then I just applied the rotation, and then it's just a matter of placing it into the scene and painting it over and trying to make it look remotely nice without crying. All right, with this thing, I actually reused a building from another image I did, and then I started playing around. What would happen if I, place the buildings like this or like that? You can make, how many are these? 6 different buildings in a matter of minutes by just rotating around and telling the cloner to do this or that or do nothing at all. All right, so let me just really quickly jump into Cinema 4D. Let's see if I have it open. I have it right here. And let's make a new scene. So again, don't laugh. This will be very basic. So what if I have a cube and I just extrude it, a bit randomly. I want to make a funky building. So I don't know, like this, and maybe select everything again, copy it again, and do it like this. Why not? It's all improvising here. So now I'm going to the cloner, and I'm pressing Alt, so it immediately drops it to the cloner. And you can see there's already 3 copies. And now I can say, I want there to be millions. I mean, let's go with less than millions. So now we have a cool high-rise building. So that's iteration 1. Let's copy it. And see what happens if we make it smaller with every step. And we close the distance. So now we get kind of almost a Mayan pyramid kind of building. So when a client asks me to design a building like this, I always start like that because, like I said before, in a matter of minutes, you're able to come up with at least 6 or 7 possible solutions, and then you just press render and maybe sketch over it, maybe draw a few figures for scale, so you can actually see how big the building is, and then send it over to the client and wait until they throw a bunch of money at your face, which of course never happens. But yeah, it's all about experimenting. So here, in just a couple of minutes, we already have 3 buildings, and we can maybe make one more. Um, this would be a very not functional building, or maybe it's a building after an earthquake, who knows. So if I just collapse this down, I used to have a hotkey for that, but not on this laptop, because I'm stupid and I forget everything. So now let's say that this building got maybe damaged. I work in a very destructive way, so I never hesitate to just like, you know, punch a hole in the building like this. It's all, it's all about the experimentation, and because the 3D is never my end result, I can allow to make mistakes because I will be able to fix them later anyway in Photoshop. So Cloner, that's pretty cool. I think it's a nice tool. All right, so for example, with this giant moving vehicle, those tire tracks there would be yeah, pretty hard to draw or pretty hard to model without making use of the cloner. So what I can do here is just make this one link and then make a spline that basically tells Cinema 4D to copy this little tire track bit across this spline, and then you get the tire tracks that we have right there. And that's already a pretty good base to to start working from there, because you have like your what's that called, chassis or something? I don't know. I'm very Dutch. All right, so let's go into a couple of other tools. Displacement. This is my other favorite tool because it allows me, as a 2D artist, it allows me to use my 2D images to actually deform my models. And the way it works is like this. So you start with a cube, and then you apply, you basically apply a texture like that. So this was just made in Photoshop, just a bunch of cubes, very quickly drawn. But if you tell that texture to act as a displacement, it turns the black and white values within that texture. It takes that and turns it into a height map. So you get from this very boring cube to this super elaborate structure, and again within a matter of seconds. And for a stupid boy like me who doesn't understand tech, it's surprisingly fast, and it allows me to come up with very quick solutions to then send over to my clients. So take this image, for example. This is what the regular model looked like without any textures or without any displacements. And then I took this very abstract texture that I made in Photoshop by just like brushing a little bit and using some photos and adjusting some levels. And then if I use that as a displacement map, you suddenly get this. So this is a ton of more information compared to this. So what I also did here is I made a very quick texture and smacked it on top of there too. So I had some color information to work from. So what I'm trying to do is I try to solve all of my design challenges. I try to solve that in 3D. So for me, the 2D part is only fun and only making it look, appealing. And actually, all of the decisions like composition, like maybe this line is leading into the image, maybe there's a little boat that is flying around over there. Those are all decisions that I am trying to consciously make while I'm playing around in 3D. And that makes the whole process a whole lot of fun. Because I work alone at home, and it's really hard sometimes to work without crying. But so I try to make it fun for myself. All right, so here's another one. I'm just going through a whole bunch of pictures, and I'm probably going way over time, but we'll see how that goes. So here's the regular model, and then with a displacement map, bam, explosion sounds. Suddenly there's a whole lot more detail that I can then use to work off of. So this one is probably one of the most cheaty ones I have, because this is what it looked like in 3D without displacement maps. And by just turning the displacement on and turning those black and white textures into actual height maps, it looked like this. So I didn't actually have to model that whole factory building. It's just a texture that does the work for me. And then it's just a matter of adding some smoke and make it look less 3D-ish. And then this one. This one is, I'm still a little bit ashamed of this because I made this in 4 hours, start to finish. Don't tell the client, this is being recorded. I am pretty much screwed right now. I'm pretty sure they're fine with it. So what this was is this image was made by taking a top-down shot of Manhattan, downtown Manhattan, and basically using the values or the black and white information within this texture to generate a height map. So I'm making a whole city out of just this satellite photo. And what I then did is I rotated it around like a kind of a mandala effect. You know, it's kind of a symmetrical thing. So maybe if you look closely, you can still see some of the elements of the old city. But because I'm using it by rotating and copying it around, you almost don't recognize this image anymore. It's, you know, and that's how I basically got away with it. Because when I showed it to the client, they were like, oh, that's pretty cool. And now show us how you made it. And I was like, I won't show you. But now I am. So I basically dug my own grave here, but that's okay. So, and after having a detailed model like that, yeah, by just, you know, using the information in a 2D texture, I have so much information to work with, and the image is basically almost done. I just have to paint in some nice little clouds and, you know, adjust the colors a little bit and add some depth to the city. Maybe add a couple of spaceships that are flying around. Where are they though? I'm pretty sure I had some spaceships in here. Anyway, that was a different version. And the same goes for this image. Actually, I did all of the design work here in Photoshop by just drawing that, yeah, kind of a city, the top-down city. So I'm thinking about, you know, maybe in the middle of the lake, there's maybe a temple there where people go to pray to some obscure god. You don't know what people do nowadays. And then use that information again to turn it into an actual city that you can look at from a 3D perspective. And what 3D allows me to do, I mean, this looks flat and boring, and I mean, I could send this to a client, it would provide him with some information, but it's of course way better to make a nice shot out of it by just sketching over the information I already have. So this start to finish also took less than a day. By, you know, starting making that map and then yeah, it resulting into a final image. And the cool thing is, if my client would say, yo, Leon, maybe you can change the camera angle just a little bit. And if I would have been drawing this by hand, I would be like, why? I've just spent ages on this, and now you want me to change the camera? What's wrong with you? But because I still have the 3D model lying around, I can just make a new camera, adjust the position a little bit, and then hit render, and I'm done. So you just save yourself a lot of time by just preparing a little bit more in 3D. PolyFX. This is also really, really fun. What this thing does, it changes or adjusts the behavior of every single polygon in your scene. So you go from a little cube to, you know, making every polygon a little bit smaller to complete weird explosion. But actually, you can turn this weird explosion into some kind of illustration. I mean, that's what I tried. So my illustration started with this cube, which was thus just like being deformed and being detailed with that PolyFX tool. And then, you know, there's a different camera angle. Maybe it could be a space station. You don't know. I like space stations. And then when painting over, it's just a matter of adding atmosphere, adding a bit of story, adding some characters. You know, what's the story here? Is this a giant fallen city? And are these people trying to find refuge somewhere else? Or, you know, what is it? When you're a concept artist, you're always trying to come up with little stories to tell your audience. And for me, 3D is of great help because it allows me to create very elaborate structures within a matter of, you know, the press of a button. So here I'm constantly just, you know, I'm just having fun adding atmosphere and tweaking a little bit. All right, next one. So with this one, that orb structure was pretty basic. But what I did is I told the polygons to be just a little bit smaller than what they used to be, and that's how you get this very intricate yeah, pattern going on the structure, and thus providing a lot of information. So this is what it looked like straight from a 3D render. It's all rendered in Octane Render, which is a great plugin for Cinema 4D. And here's a couple of iterations. So I started with the basic building, and then I smoothed all the edges. Then I told the polygons to be a bit smaller, and then I did something else. I don't know. All right. So with this image, I tried to make a little animation for a competition. Actually, it was about an AI taking over the city with this weird architecture, and the city actually starts gradually appearing. So with every step, he takes over the city just a little bit more. And this was made using the PolyFX tool, which I will show in 3D just now, after showing that little video. Because, again, because I have such an elaborate 3D model, I can easily animate that whole PolyFX thing and turn it into, it's not here. I'll just go back to my desktop, see if I can find it, videos, and here it is. All right, so let's open it and see what happens. So we have the city, and the city starts appearing gradually over time. It's almost like Lego bricks falling into place ever so slightly while the city expands outwards. And the way this is animated, oh wow, please close down. The way this is animated is actually so incredibly simple, because what you do, let's just collapse this building and delete the rest. We won't need this any longer. So delete this. All right, we have our building. Let's put it on the on 0 with every axis. Oh, it already is. Sure. So I'm going to add the PolyFX tool, and now I can tell here that every polygon needs to be exact 0% of itself. So it disappears entirely. And what I can now do is use a fall off, so that everything within this sphere, see, when I expand this sphere, everything within that sphere starts disappearing. And then it's just a matter of animating that sphere. So let's keyframe it right here. And then we go to frame 90 and just move the sphere way up. And then hit keyframe again. And this is basically how you can make that whole city appear. It's the other way around actually, but you get what I'm trying to say here. So what I can also do then is to get that whole Lego brick kind of feeling by randomizing every polygon. So now what happens is that every polygon kind of displaces a little bit like this. So if I adjust the parameters, you see them moving, and we can go completely crazy. So if I now press play on the animation, you see, now it's almost falling into place or disappearing like little Lego bricks doing some funky stuff. And by just experimenting and trying out a few buttons, I'm already able to come up with new stories and new concepts. Yeah, so even for a non-technical guy like me, using the animation tool can be great to provide my clients with some additional information apart from that flat image. All right, let's hit the presentation. All right, this is a fun one, Octane Scatter. So usually when I'm getting asked for work, I'm getting asked to make very intricate cityscapes. So, a lot of buildings, a lot of stuff going on. And Octane Scatter, which is a plugin again, allows me to take a bunch of very simple buildings and scatter them all over an object. So we have our cube here again, which is the source object. And then I grab all those buildings and smash them on top of them. And you get something very funky by doing that. And that way you can create a little cityscape like that. So you just tell Cinema 4D what the surface is that the buildings need to be scattered onto. And then the only thing I had were a bunch of buildings, a bunch of nice trees, and a pillar here and there. And then there's a town. And the only thing left for me to do here is having giant alien buildings, because, yeah. Let's keep it at that. I just like alien stuff. So here's the final illustration. So there's a ton of information here, and it's just a matter of painting it over, adding some photos of grass, of farmlands, and just detailing the scene a little bit more. Nice bird who was trying to figure out what the heck this big structure is. A couple of smaller birds for scale, so you can actually see how big that structure is. So you're trying to convey a story to your client. Same here. What I did here is in Photoshop, I drew a very crude map of the city. And then I told Octane Scatter to only scatter the buildings on top of the white parts in my image. And that way you have some very nice streets that are forming. It's kind of a Venetian kind of what's that very old Mexican city called Tenochtitlan? Was a Aztec, a big Aztec city. But then the only difference is this one has dragons. Yeah, I mean, and I get paid for that. Imagine that. That's pretty cool. So here's another one. Those nice little orange buildings were just made with the Octane scatter, and then the rest was modeled by hand and using a couple of cloners. And then it's just a matter of adding some nice little brushy details. Sometimes I try to hide the very tight edges because when you render with Cinema 4D, of course, you get a very 3D look. And sometimes I just want to give it a look and feel as if I painted the entire thing. While everyone knows I have been cheating a lot, but it's just it's just a matter of preference. Cool. Let's see how I am on time. I have about 25 minutes left. So same here. The story behind this is when there's a new ice age happening, there was a bunch of giant moving vehicles that drove out of the cities to find survivors. But in this case, it got a bit out of hand. They found too many people, and they started to make a city on top of the building. So all of these nice buildings there are added with the Octane scatter to show how crowded this thing really is. And this is another shot. And this is just how it looks like without texture. So you can see it's very simple. These are just basic shapes, and the buildings themselves as well. It's just cubes with more or less detail, and then just scattered on top of that. Because all of the detail will later be added in Photoshop. So this one, I finished this one not too long ago, probably a month ago, and it was kind of the same workflow. But it was kind of exciting because the scale needed to be so large. The client wanted me to create a city around kind of a crater lake, like a dormant volcano. And what I did is I told the Octane scatter to only scatter along these beaches right here. So you create this kind of half-moon shape. And then by telling Octane scatter that the buildings need to be randomized in size, you create a very non-uniform city. It kind of looks like it's alive. Like there's big buildings here, maybe there's rich people living there. I wanted to say a worse word, but let's keep it at people. And the smaller buildings are occupied with people who have less money to spare. So these are all little things you think about. Well, it's actually one press of the button by making the buildings bigger and smaller. You're already creating a sense of scale and a sense of maybe a class difference or something like that. So here's a couple of other renders. And then, yeah, painted over looks like this. Cool. And there's this other thing, X-Particles. X-Particles is a very elaborate plugin that allows you to create things like storms or clouds or little particles that go from a fire, for example. Little, sparkles or something. But I actually use it to generate architecture with it. So what's happening here is I told X-Particles to generate particles on this surface. And then what I told particles there on the right side is to make a connection with each other. And by doing that, you can almost create a stage like this. So probably people at home will not see this, but it looks kind of similar to that. So if you wanted to concept something like that, you just have to press a button and let X-Particles do the work, find the connection between the dots, and you create a very elaborate structure like that. And these techniques are actually used by modern scientists and architects to find very strong connections without using much materials. But of course, it's way more elaborate than what I am doing. I just do it because I like the looks. I don't know any of the sciences behind it. So yeah, you can see it here. Some stuff in the background has the connection type of stuff, and here are some metal structures that just populate the vehicle a little bit more. Same here. Here I just had a couple of particles that very slowly started generating a structure like this. So I just pressed play and watched the magic unfold. So I put in a lot of parameters because I sketched a structure like this because I wanted to make like a nighttime, almost like a party club kind of thing. It had a Japanese theme. This was made for a book cover, by the way. So I wanted to have a very modern architecture look with the very, organic look and feel to it. So I just made a few particles, and then when I pressed play, they slowly started forming that structure. and then you have to just paint over it to populate the scene, make it look alive, and you're done. So textures as well. Again, I've been talking a lot about how I'm cheating all the time when I'm working, and textures is just a little bit more information I could use. So, oops, sorry, let me get back. For a render like this, I just used the Photoshop mosaic filter. I don't know if anyone knows it, but it's the most cheaty thing you could ever do. But because I am hiding all of the details anyway later in Photoshop, it doesn't matter. This just gives me quite enough information to have some color to work with. And then I just can like pick the colors, or maybe pick the color that's in the sky, and start making this image look alive. And again, with information like this, I can easily animate a turnaround so people or clients can see the scale that I'm trying to work with here. So here, there's a cool, I hope this never happens to Paris, but it might as well in the future, you never know. So what I did, I tried to mimic the structure of the Eiffel Tower. How I did this was actually just a photo I took in Paris from the Eiffel Tower, and I used that to replace this basic model. But I wanted the slum buildings to kind of built up to the Eiffel Tower to make it look like very dense and populated. And what I did is I just used this very crappy, if I'm allowed to say that, texture, and smacked it on top of that building, just to have some color information to work with. And then it's just a matter of painting it over and using all of the little details I have here, copy that, and transform it, and throw a bunch of it away, delete other stuff, add new stuff, and then you end up with a final illustration. I'm not going too far into the Photoshop workflow because it's a bit irrelevant. Yeah, because I just wanted to talk about the tools in Cinema 4D that I use to create concept art with. Because probably some of you know that Cinema 4D is being used to create very elaborate motion graphic videos for commercials, or they use it to create UI design for movies or stuff like that. But I actually use it in a very experimental way. Like I said before, a box of Legos. So here's another thing I did. There's a bunch of things. So this is the simple model. Again, bunch of cubes. And then with these textures and with the use of a displacement map that I talked about before, you get a more elaborate structure like this. And then this was the final illustration. All right. So recently, I discovered something called VR. You know, does anyone of you know the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive? You can actually use it right now to sculpt your own scenes. And that's been very magical for me. And what was actually better is that I can import the stuff that I sculpt in VR and then import it into Cinema 4D and then use all the tools that I already knew, like the cloner or the displacement map, to enhance those models a bit more. So I just made this small part of a building, and then when I was back into Cinema 4D, I just copied it around, and suddenly you get a very elaborate starfish-like structure, which you could use for, I don't know, maybe a game, maybe it's a station house or whatever. Could be anything. It was just me experimenting and having fun, because again, that's a big drive of me. When I'm not having fun with my work, I usually just tend to do other things. So this is sculpted in Oculus Medium. It's a sculpting tool, but you can actually use it to create small houses or ships. And then when imported back into Cinema 4D and combined with the Octane Render, I can just start implementing some textures to see what the buildings are made of. Like, is it made of wood or metal? This already tells a lot about the story that I'm trying to tell. Unfortunately, I didn't turn this into an illustration because I didn't like the look, but I felt it was worth including it into this presentation. And VR allows you to do vehicles as well. So what I did, I just sculpted one half of the vehicle, and then I used the symmetry object in Cinema 4D to, make it symmetrical. And suddenly you have kind of a, I don't know, what is it? A space station? It's based on a little flying creature, an insect or a moth maybe. All the textures and the rendering was also done in Cinema. All right, here's some other projects where I'm combining all of the tools. So when I'm making an illustration, I almost tend to treat my scene like little islands, because since, again, my final product is the illustration, I don't have to model the entire scene. It's not like I have a camera that's flying through it and like going through the entire planet. I just need a couple of details, and I just need the bare minimum that I can use to create an illustration like that. So it's all about being very fast, because the concept art industry is very, it's competitive, and you also need to be very quick with your turnaround. Sometimes you need to create 6 or 7 sketches within a day, because usually movies and games are on a very tight schedule, so you need to provide your clients with very quick solutions, very quick ideas. And experimenting with Cinema 4D allows me to really do that. All right, here's a bunch of other shots. Because if the client wouldn't like this shot, I just head back into Cinema 4D, change the camera angle, and throw it at them. So you like this? You like this now? I don't know. They probably didn't, but it's fun. And this is me just sketching over it in black and white, because when you have to think about color as well, that just adds so much more time to your workflow. So sometimes I just take my render and turn it into black and white and just start sketching in some details, like little characters or little commercial signs. Or maybe it could be a map. So here's the bar, because in every science fiction town you need a bar, because otherwise everyone would be confused. So you better, drink a bunch of stuff. So that's what I sometimes do as well, to provide the client with additional information. So usually when you're making an illustration, you start with a very crude sketch, and then you detail that more and more until it looks like a final image. But what I tend to do sometimes is I start with a whole lot of detail like this. You can't even see what's happening. And then when I go into Photoshop, I start hiding the detail and making it a little bit more readable. So I added some atmosphere, I added some green parts, some lights in the building, so we can see just a little bit better what's going on here. All right, so this little city based around a Japanese moon gate was made using the same progress. So there's displacement maps in there and the octane scatter to make those little buildings. There are some emissive textures that actually have lighting information within them, so they light the rest of the scene. And then by having that little island, you can turn it into a thing that looks like something. So that was it for my workflow. I wanted to talk about Kitbash 3D for a second. I think this is a fantastic tool for concept artists and also for film studios and game studios. If you are on a very tight schedule and you need something very quick, why don't you just buy a pack full of 3D models that were already made for you? So for example, we have the slums set right here, which you can use to create maybe a poor district in your game. This cover was made by Sava Sivkovic, a very good friend of mine. He's from Serbia and he's an art director for Axis. I really love him. So here's another one, the Wild West set. And here is Pablo Carpio making a very, very awesome illustration by just using those models that Kitbash already provided for them. So Kitbash was a product founded by Banks Boutte and Max Berman, and actually on this day they exist for 1 year. So little thing for them. Big shout out, of course. And there's what they do as well. They provide poor artists like us to help them out with little covers. So whenever they make a new set, they approach us to maybe make a cool Egyptian scene. So this was made by Jonas de Roo. He's very, very famous in this industry. And this one is the industrial set, and the cover was made by a matte painter, Steven Corman from Belgium. And then I was also very lucky to have done one. I still feel like a little kid when talking about this, because they made the Utopia kit, which was basically a Kitbash kit with modern architecture, and I'm a big sucker for that kind of stuff. So I was very happy that they allowed me to do that. So what they did, they provided me with these very intricate models, and then my assignment was just to make everything look very cohesive. So what I did is I used a bunch of my own models. I started modeling some nice and organic shapes, and this is me just experimenting with trying to find maybe it's a station house or something. Maybe there's trains coming and going from there. And then I used the Kitbash models to enhance all of that. So this is just the scene without any textures on it. And basically, this was just me before going into texturing, just trying to find a nice composition. Because that's also something that I'm trying to solve within 3D already. Because composition is of course very important when you're talking about artworks, because you're trying to lead the eye of the audience, you're trying to lead them into your image. So we have the railway here, and it's leading all the way up to the station house, and then we have all these curves which are basically all pointing to that main building over there. So these are all decisions you're trying to make when when working in 3D and with cinema. And because you can just change your camera angle so quickly, you can come up with, a dozen of shots within, seconds. Okay, that's overacting. Minutes, hours? I don't know. As long as you're having fun. So this is something that's called a clown pass or a material pass. And you can render that separately from Cinema 4D. And what's great about that is that I can throw this into Photoshop and use the flat color information to make very crude selections. So let's say if I want my windows right here, if I want them to be red, I just needed to go back into this material ID pass and select all of the blue values. I can just do that very quickly with the press of a button in Photoshop. And then the only thing I have to do, because now I have all my windows selected, I just have to maybe paint them red or adjust some values and make them red. So these tools make the whole 2D process even quicker. And here's another one. This is called the ZDEF pass. And the black and white information here is, for example, used to create fog. So if I would create like a layer of fog, I would just brush it in. And then if I apply this ZDEF pass, all the white values, that's where the fog applies the most. So I mean, in real life, on a misty day, if you have a road with trees, the further you look into the distance, the more the trees get obscured by mist. And you can use this ZDEF pass to do exactly that. So the further you go back into the Z space, the more obscured everything gets. So this was the basic model that I started with. I mean, I ended up with in 3D. So there's already a ton of detail for me to work with. And then it's just, having a lot of fun, brushing a lot of details in, adding some background mountains, adding some more lighting information, maybe adding a road here and there, a park here and there, to just show that this scene is occupied by actual people, or robots, or aliens, whatever floats your boat. Yeah, something like that. And I could just make a few other shots. Because the 3D scene I have was so intricate that I was just allowed to, get a bunch of other stuff. So let me jump into 3D really quick, because I still have a couple of minutes left. And let's see if I have the scene lying around for the Utopia thing. All right, so this is the camera angle that I went with. But if we zoom out, you can see that everything beyond that camera angle is not detailed at all. And the reason why I do this is because the 2D illustration is my final product. I don't need all of the information that is outside of my camera. So in order to save myself some time, I just create whatever is essential for me, and then I just roll with that. So if my client wanted me to make a more far away shot, then I would have to populate the city even more. But as long as they don't ask for it, you don't have to do it. So you can actually see that everything in here is very densely populated, and everything outside of that is very, very, there's nothing there really. And I'm still using the cloners here. For example, I took this Kit Bash building. Let me see if I can find it. Probably not, because that's also a thing. Since I'm a 2D illustrator, I work in a very messy and chaotic way. So my layers, or the way I'm working, is so messy that no one probably could make sense out of it. A client often asks me, "Yo, Leon, can you send us your 3D model? Then we could use it for reference to model from." And I was like, no, it's such a mess. I would probably require like 2 hours to fix it before sending it over to them. But yeah, then again, since I'm the 2D person, I don't need that at all. So let's see. See, by just dragging this little node here, I can change the way the buildings are arranged. So even with intricate buildings like this, I use the tools like the cloner tool to make everything look more funky or more interesting. So I think that is it, actually. Let me jump back to the keynote real quick, see if I forgot something. No, I think that's it. So this is my name. It's Leon Tukker. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or just come up to me. I'll be sticking around for an hour or so. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask me anything. What's my favorite color? What's my favorite animal? I don't know. But I'll answer. I'll try to answer it.
Are there questions?
Yeah.
You did one or two things with, one was with X-Particles, and one was with Octane Scatter.
Yeah.
Both of those things could easily have been done also with MoGraph or not?
They could, I think, but it would be just a little bit more elaborate. I think the Octane provided me with such like a quick way to do it that I just stuck with it. I'm pretty sure there's a workaround to do exactly the same with Cinema 4D, but it might be a little bit more heavy on your PC. Because Octane is a GPU renderer, so when I'm using the Octane scatterer, my actual viewport is just a bunch of dots and a bunch of stripes, and those are the instances of the buildings that I just copied around. But then in the renderer, you can actually see all of those buildings actually appearing. So it's not heavy for my computer, but the renderer shows the information that I want to see.
Okay, cool, thank you.